Welcome to the Guest House. I'm Sean Perel. I'm an integrative therapist, a yoga and meditation teacher, a lifelong student of the thesis of our belonging, and I'm also a parent and a fellow human being grappling with many of the same questions that you may be grappling with too. In these conversations, I'm turning to some of the folks I most admire, and together we're exploring the complexities and also the creative potential of being human in an era of radical change. Thank you so much for being with us. Many of us sense the benefits of mindfulness in our lives. Walking alone in the woods, in moments of wonder, in listening quietly to a friend. But when it comes to seated meditation, we either don't know where to start or we struggle to commit to a regular practice. Sound familiar? Maybe you've dabbled with the guidance of meditation app or a book and now you're ready to develop personal agency in your practice. Or maybe, like many of us, you're simply struggling with the overwhelm of life and you're open to anything that might help. Whatever the case, I welcome you to join When the Body Becomes All Eyes. It's a Foundations of Mindfulness meditation course that I will be teaching beginning on April 25th. It is a 6-week course. You can participate live for 1 hour per week, or you can listen to the recordings on your own schedule. And in this progressive sequence, we'll provide the interdisciplinary framework, practical skills, and the community context to establish and nurture the foundations of a regular seated practice. I so look forward to gathering with many of you beginning in April. You can learn more about this course and all my other offerings in the show notes and on my website at seanperel.com. Thanks so much, and on to today's show.
My guest today is Jessica Lazar. Jess is, so I asked Jess to send a bio. It was one sentence that arrived. So I'm gonna come up with it. Ready? You can correct me. Jess is a polymath. She is one of those rare people who is deeply knowledgeable and articulate and able to synthesize a broad range of subjects, which I really, truly love and admire. How conversations can go from politics to literature to history to psychology to science to pop culture. She is a longtime yoga and meditation teacher, really a teacher's teacher, who leads long-form immersions and international retreats still to this day. And she's also been a dedicated student of world-renowned teacher Shiva Rea for several decades now, as well as Tara Brach, Pema Chodron, and the list goes on. She has 2 graduate degrees in journalism and poetry, respectively, and she spent 12 years living and working in Israel as a journalist. She is part of an Israeli-American family and has not only granted her fluency in Hebrew, but truly a multicultural perspective. And most importantly, Jess is a remarkable mom to two Gen Zers, adulting daughters, Ella and Eden. I asked Jess to join me today for a conversation that has really like nothing and everything to do with her bio. Jess is one of the most enduring friends of my life. And whenever there's something in life that I'm like scratching my head about, like, oh, that thing, like marriage, what is that all about? Or that thing, like friendship, what is that all about? You're the person that I turn to. There's the sort of angle of, okay, what is it like to have a long time friendship in and at different phases of our lives, and how we have sort of had this really interesting arc journey of friendship together that we can go into a little more. And also just this phenomenon of friendship and what is friendship? What is its purpose?
And you just turned 40.
I just turned 40.
And when we met, you were 19.
And you were 33. Yeah. We met at a yoga studio. You were a bona fide teacher at this yoga studio in Washington, D.C. called Down Dog Yoga, owned by Patty Ivy at the time. I was like sweeping the floors and working at the front desk and basically was psyched to have a free class pass. And I think I had been through a teacher training at that point, but I was still so nascent in terms of like actually getting into a studio and teaching. And so it really, to me, our friendship began on the grounds of really a slipstream. It was about seeing in you a really kindred integration of practice, like just very shared sensibilities about what does it mean to be in this rhythm of life that is the life of a practitioner. I just like looked at you and I was like, here's my teacher. She's here. She's arrived. It's also a time in my life when I was I was 19 and I was totally a mess in lots of areas of my life and kind of looking from the outside in a little bit more together, but from the inside out, just a bundle of anxiety and depression and all of these things. And so there was a certain sense of guardianship that our friendship brought to my life and connection to, okay, this is what it's like to be really like held in relationship with, with like a stable and insightful presence.
And then, it's true. When we met, you were so young. You were even just a little bit younger than my youngest daughter now, just about the same age as she. And you seem to me to have just such incredible presence of mind, even though I can, like, if I close my eyes, I can see your face and I can realize at this point, like how really young you were, how really young you were. But I instantly recognized in you some sort of age-defying kindredship that didn't establish itself. I don't think our relationship rooted itself on like a mother-daughter thing, because I've had that before too with someone much younger than myself. It wasn't like that. It wasn't like somebody needed a mommy and I was going to be mommy. It wasn't like that. There certainly was some sort of like delta that closed over time, just because of the 14 years. And like you said, the life stages, which were somewhat asynchronous for a long time, now less so, but maybe it's because pretty quickly, because of my divorce that followed a few years later after we met, that, that care that you felt that I could provide and that stability that you felt that I could provide, I quickly kind of lost, and in some ways, and turned to you to literally provide for me in some ways. Like when I said, like, how about you move out of your apartment and I move into it? How about that? How does that sound?
This is too good not to share, right? You introduced me to my husband. We're fast forwarding a little bit, right? Like, so I started, I was like a, messy 19-year-old. You were really, like truly squarely, like, this is my teacher. I spent, the first few years, I think, of our friendship really just under your wing, like just studying, wanting to be, okay, when can I assist for your class? When can I come with you to meet who would become my teacher, Shiva, right? There were so many of these kind of like really those first few years were you initiating me into a world of practice and teaching, which to this day is the foundation of my all of the rest of my work and life as a practitioner. And then your then marriage was coming undone, and you had in the interim introduced me to the man who would become my husband, who was a dear friend of yours at that time.
Mhm.
And he and I kind of like, it took a long time to kind of like finally click. And then once it clicked, it was like on, like, you know, it
Mhm.
was like in the first week or two, I was like, you know, barely living in my apartment. So then shortly thereafter, you called us. I remember we were on the phone together and you're like, well, so we need a pied à terre, right? Like
Yeah.
we need, we need an apartment
Yeah.
so that rather than uprooting your children, you could alternate with your then, you know, separated husband at the time and have somewhere else that each of you could go. And so your suggestion was, Sean, why don't you hand over the keys of your apartment, move in with Russell, and that's that. Don't you think that'd be great?
Wow. Like the chutzpah that is required to call your friend and nonchalantly suggest that they move out so you can move in is somewhat gobsmacking. But yeah, I guess, you know, necessity being the mother of invention and all, I thought I'd give it a try. I mean, I don't know. I don't think I even felt any embarrassment about it. I think I was just like,
No,
float this idea out there.
no, and it didn't, I mean, and I think that's really a testament to, you know, just kind of like the ground that we had formed together, where it was like, I was like, all right, yeah, we're going to work that out.
Yeah.
And it was totally fine. It felt low stakes, you know,
Yeah.
and it felt um, you know, this is about, you know, we're in this together. And when one
Yeah.
of us has a need, the other one is there to support it.
Yeah. And this might be a good time for me to mention that I was raised in an intentional community. And that's a story for another day. But I was, you know, I was young in the 70s, and the 70s were a time of experimentation for the adults. And my mother, as a divorced adult in the early 70s, found an intentional urban community and raised my sister and me there. And it's a real community, not like a loosely held one, like one where, you know, you give over the agency you have over your finances, over many things. And so it was, I was raised communally for about half my life, living communally in houses with, you know, say 18 other people, other families, other singles, and lots of other kids. And we could talk a long time about like the imprint that left on me, but one indelible value that it instilled in me was this sense that uh there's no way to kind of get through life alone. Like it's just not possible, and it's not optimal. And like we develop relationships so that we can lean into the web, into the, you know, the living web of friendship and relationship that we are investing in. And as I got older, I saw that for some, when things come apart, not only does that artery of support, such as a marriage, or, you know, if someone dies, or loss of employment, or things that can be really derailing, not only does that artery of support instantly dry up, but some people find themselves like completely alone facing that adversity. I've seen that. And it can be really confusing because people didn't realize, someone might not have realized that they didn't have any relationships that were deep enough wells to draw from. They may have thought that they had plenty of friends or they had plenty of community. And so I find that interesting, you know, as a place to kind of anchor inquiry. Like, what is it that makes some relationships seaworthy for all the adversity that we face, and others, even though they may be, quote, close, there's a lot of contact or there's a lot of exchange, they're not seaworthy for that. And as teachers of meditation yoga, we know that everything ends in death. And yet, as we get closer to it, we realize like, oh, you know, and this is of course so cliche, but like all cliches, just attended by truth, you know, oh, I'm going to go through all of this dissolution in my actual body. Like in my actual body, I am going to dissolve.
Mhm. It's almost like the filter, or like so many of these filters of friendship, right? That are sort of like pithy, but it's like, okay, who's going to be coming to the funeral and who's going to be like planning the funeral? Who's going to be like there? There's a necessary filtering over time. It's really interesting to me. I mean, first of all, let's just back up for a second and say, like, it is inadequate to have one word for such a vast range of relationships, so many hues of relationship, right? Like, oh, my friend who I've like actually met six times, and like,
Right.
or like the lovely other mom that I like go to the ballet classes with. At the surface of our adult lives, it can actually be a little difficult to see what is the invisible landscape here of friendship, because we're not living in the same places, we're not in the same daily rhythms necessarily, although some people are that lucky to be able to have to be in sync with each other through various phases of life. And there's research by Lydia Dentworth. She's a science journalist, and she talks about how like the average person has 4 to 8 real relationships in their lives.
Yes.
Right. And like what is a real relationship? It's one that has 3 factors. It is stable, it's positive, and it's reciprocal. And I mean, those are, sort of very, basic terms, but I think it's the sort of the DNA for what, in your terms, like what relationships are seaworthy, what relationships are the ones that are going to really hold over time and through different phases of life. And in some ways, I would say that our friendship grew sort of on the grounds of an asynchronous experience. And in a lot of ways, even though, we weren't pushing our strollers together, and I know, each of us had other friends in our lives that we did get to have that kind of bonded sort of immediacy of those growing edges with.
And I think one thing that has characterized our friendship that others in like the world of yoga, meditation, wellness, I mean, we need better phraseology now, but in that world is that there's a lot of ungroundedness, and there's a lot of lostness, and there's a lot of need, and there's a lot of projection, and there's a lot of vortices that a person could get sucked into. And I think one of the things that characterizes the friends, the real friends I have from that world, from that circle of the Venn diagram of my life, is like people who were able to hold ground in a very heady, ethereal world. I think about like William Bronk's poem, like The Drift to the World, like being an anchor in the drift to the world. That poem that he wrote about friendship, where I thought you were an anchor in the drift to the world. The poem ends, of course, with that, him being disabused of that idea that anybody could ever be an anchor for anybody in the drift of the world. But I think we definitely found anchor in each other in a very drifty set of circumstances sometimes, for anybody who might not know what I mean, like, in the heyday of yoga in the US, we might be at like a breath workshop, like no names are going to be named, but like maybe we'd be at a thing and we'd sort of look at each other as people around us are, hyperventilating and dropping off. And we're thinking like, do they realize that like all they're doing is hyperventilating and that's why they're passing out? Like science, because science. So yeah, I think, there's some of that too, like to be able to, call a spade, in a world we loved and in a world that nurtured us, and also one we had the bluff of which we had to call plenty in order to stay sane and to stay rooted and to stay anchored.
we are living in a world where it's so easy to become adrift even within ourselves, to go like, what do I actually think of all of this? Who am I in all of this? How do I relate? It can be a really lonely experience, really lonely experience to kind of be at the center of something that's swirling and to go like, where is my belonging here?
Right. And like the swirling takes different forms, like different valences, right? Depending on the stage of life. There's the swirl of college, and there's a swirl of immediately after college. And then there's a swirl of early parent, falling in love, or, finding a partner, and then, anchoring into some job and parenthood, and all of these different swirls, catch us up like a tide and hold us really fast. But then when they're over, whoosh, get spit out. And as long as we're getting spit out into the next thing, we might not even notice that these stages of life, the drift of the world, is not actually an organizing force central enough to help us echolocate inside, like you described, like to know ourselves, right? And I was Shannon Watts, who founded Moms Demand Action. She's like this really dynamic, the anti-gun lobby. This really super dynamic woman. She's lately pivoted to writing much more personally, kind of beyond her anti-gun advocacy work. And the stuff that she's been putting out, I have found really profound. She wrote an essay about waking up at 50, which I think just happened for her quite recently, and realizing that she didn't have any friends. And of course, that was like real surprising for others to hear, because here's this, beautiful, dynamic, smart, super successful, outspoken public person admitting that they don't have friends. And what she was saying basically was that all of those tidal pulls upon her, one after the other, had left her without like a kind of axis, including people, a grounding force.
I think this is really, really powerful, because in some ways, like if we actually open the relational apertures of our lives and like really look into it, can be a real source of grief.
Yeah.
It can be a real source of grief. It's like Ezra Klein talks about, we're in this post-extended family era, where the sense of belonging really wasn't like such a question in so many generations past.
It's like an experiment, he says, right? We're in an experimental period where we don't live near our extended families, like you say, and it's never happened before in history that we find ourselves so unmoored in that way.
That's right. And we are, I mean, there's in psychological terms, it's called social baseline theory. Like we are a communal species. Our stress load is distributed among a group, just like, a zebra out in the middle of the Sahara is going to have to be more vigilant than if it's surrounded by all its striped friends.
Right.
Right. So like and then what has happened is that when so many of our needs as a communal species are no longer met by these larger webs of family, what happens?
Yeah.
People become unmoored. We're subject to become really unmoored from the basic sense of belonging, a sense of unconditional acceptance, right? A sense of, like even a sense of love, a sense of like, am I really loved? And I think that we don't name this, and it's hard to name, right? Because it's sort of like there's it's the negative space of friendships, where we kind of look around at whatever the kind of presenting image of the friendship is and go like, what is missing here?
Yeah.
Are there, like, to what extent? And we look for these little clues from those with whom we're in relationship to say, like, you're okay, you're safe here. I'm going to still be here. I'm still going to show up. Right. And in many ways, I don't think that we can even really test a boat until it goes out into the water and it's been out there for a long time. We can't really, like, every time we're like, oh, my new bestie, like, that is a leap of faith.
Yeah. Right. Right. That is perhaps sometimes a very ill-fated leap of faith. And sometimes it yields, fantastic or temporarily or temporally delightful results. But I agree with you. The extent to which we can rely on someone or be with someone or accompany someone in an abiding way goes so far beyond like how much fun you have with a person, or, like, those things have to attend it. There has to be spark and connection and alchemy, of course, just like with any relationship. But over time, there has to be some deeper vein of capacity. And not everybody has that. Like, you could have the best time with someone. I've had a couple of friendships like that. One in particular I'm thinking of that ended, that was full of fun and full of sort of joy and delight, and just, it was wacky. There was levity, but when the rubber hit the road, it just poof, disappeared and surprised me, and, like you said, grieved me tremendously and hurt to see that what I had thought was so dimensional and, characterized by so much scaffolding that I might have called like joy or kinship, or, we have so much in common, common ground. None of that really mattered, because the underlying capacity to hold on, in Rumi language, like to hold on in the strong wind, when the strong wind started shaking our structure, it just fell to the ground,
It's interesting to even just to examine like marriage and how historically marriage, wasn't viewed as the sort of like, ironclad institution, sealed, vacuumed institution that it is today. And as a result, I mean, Esther Perel talks about how we expect now for one person to fulfill what we used to expect a village to fulfill.
Totally. And I want to recreate that village. I don't know about you. I know we've alluded to it. Like, I'm in my mid-50s now, and, what I'm looking at over the next 10 years is really distilling for myself, where do I want to be? How can I surround myself not only with the home, the beautiful home space with the vibration that feels nourishing to me, but how also can I, root down somewhere where I can be in a constellation with other people I care about a lot, and how can I do that, intergenerationally, and how can I also have opportunities to volunteer and work, stay busy. I think about like the research on blue zones and how, the people who live the longest are the ones who feel appreciated and tasked. All blue zones have that in common, that their elderly feel like they're gracefully repurposed societally from whatever role they held in their middle years. Like, they might not be able to continue doing what they did in their middle years, but they have purpose as they move into that, autumnal time, or, in Buddhist language, into that transition, right? From birth to abiding to transition to death. And, it's not by accident that there's actually a third phase. We could just say birth, abiding, death, but we don't say birth, abiding, transition, death. Why? Because there's a whole period of life, and because we're living longer, it's a longer period. where we're straddling two different prospects.
So I feel like we're talking about two levels. We're talking about community and the vision of, what does real community look like for us in this, post extended family era. And then we're also talking about the intimacy of enduring, friendship, the sort of invisible world that two people can share over time. Okay, so just a really quick context here. My Brilliant Friend is the story of Elena and Lila, these two girls growing up in really impoverished, turbulent world of 1950s Naples. It's a story that's told from the point of view of Elena, and it's told, it starts like decades later when Lila has mysteriously disappeared. And these girls, they're drawn to each other through their love of learning and their curiosity, and they really do grow, throughout their lives in this sort of in a coupled way, and not in a way that is that's necessarily explicit in their lives as they grow older, but that they are in the world in one way or another in relationship to each other. They're each other's, sort of compass. Elena Ferranti, who's just like the way that she writes is about friendship, about female friendship in My Brilliant Friend is just so, and the whole sequence of those novels it is so deeply nuanced. And she says, our friendships are terra incognita, chiefly to ourselves, a land without fixed rules. Anything and everything can happen to you. Nothing is certain. Its exploration in fiction advances arduously. It's a gamble, a strenuous undertaking. And at every step, there is above all the risk that a story's honesty will be clouded by good intentions, hypocritical calculations, or ideologies that exalt sisterhood in ways that are often nauseating.
Yeah. It's really uncanny that you read that passage, because I was thinking that what ends up actually creating a net of safety for intimate relationships is when there is like some agreed upon protocols for how to broach conflict. Like conflict is inevitable. I mean, we've experienced it. Is there any intimate relationship I have that hasn't been attended by it? I mean, no, for me is the answer. And I find that, the relationships that have been enduring are the ones that have been able to like lean in the moment when all we want to do is lean out. All we want to do is, well, I should say for myself, like all I want to do is, blame the other, or all I want to do is kind of give up and say like, there's no there anymore, or there isn't enough common ground, or we never really had it in the first place, and I think you said to me years ago when I asked you, I actually can't remember about what. It might have been about a boyfriend. I'm not sure. But I think I said, like, how do you know? How are you supposed to know when it's time to give up?
Mm.
And you said, well, what if the answer is never? And I was like, I remember thinking like, that was not on the storyboard. Like the storyboard was when, not if, and so it really like, it troubled my conception, but it stayed with me. It's like, what if, you close your exits? We think about that in marriage, right? We close the exit. Every time we get irritated, we don't bring up divorce. Like that's a recipe for disaster, right? If every time something bothers us, we say like, well, I'm done. That would be it would be tough to, to have anything accrue to us in that way in marriage. But so too with friendship. Like, what if the answer is never? What if, what if we make that commitment to certain friendships in some ways kind of counter to what Ferrante says there, where we allow the tempests of life to kind of toss us and maybe toss us away from each other. But see, I love what she said there. We should expect all of those weather patterns. Exactly. And we should know that they're all coming. And we should know that they have the power to separate, to, you know, to create in a moment a riven landscape. We should know that that's a possibility, and we should meet that reality with all of our aptitude, capacity, awareness, if we want to remain, if we want to abide, if we want to belong to each other.
I think it's like when people get married and they're like, we've never gotten in a fight, and you're like, good luck.
Right.
There's something about rupture, the inevitability, as you're speaking about, of rupture and repair, or at least rupture, right? Mm-hmm. And then the love language becomes, how can we repair? And the relationships in our lives, back to that idea of like stability, positivity, receptivity. It's about how do we get back up again? How do we show up again and again? And I also love how she frames here this idea of like, it's a gamble and it's a strenuous thing. And I think it's one thing that really kind of fascinates me in terms of friendship styles, because you and I have quite different styles of friendship. In other words, and I wonder if you'll speak a little bit about the sort of cultural context for this for you. But I have the sense with you of like, there is a sentinel at the door. Like, not everybody's getting through. You are selective. You're careful. You're careful. And I've seen it, and I've seen that. I think it's always sort of been that way, but I've seen that that kind of filter grow more refined over time. And I think oftentimes I have felt like I'm sort of like, the door is open and I will trust you until proven otherwise.
Yeah, right. It's like, right. It's like the flip side, innocent until proven guilty, guilty until proven innocent, which one, who we take different tacks, I guess, but not that I think people are guilty until proven innocent, just not exactly, but, no, what I think it is that I don't like to promise what I can't deliver. Mm-hmm. I don't like to extend. I feel uncomfortable extending something that I can't continue to provide into perpetuity. And so, even though I have had some fleeting friendships and it's been fine as they dissolve, like, I guess I like to avoid feeling like I'm going to disappoint someone. And like, I definitely feel my own finitude in that realm. Like, I don't have the bandwidth to be, like a deep friend to 10 people. Mm-hmm. I don't have it. And it's not about time. Time we have. It's more about wellspring. It's more about like groundwater. That's like a precious, limited resource.
Yeah. And I mean, the other side of that is the risk that I've experienced many times in relationship, where either I come across as a lot more open than I actually am or feel. And so then it creates a set of expectations that then, I feel uncomfortable in when that person might actually perceive, oh yeah, there is a boundary here, or there isn't the sense of intimacy that maybe was assumed. And it also creates at times just a sense of like feeling really spread thin. But I do think that as we're in this kind of like, it's spoken about as like a friendship recession, these times that we're living in, that these are the kinds of questions that I find myself really asking, like, okay, we're in the middle of this loneliness epidemic. So many of us are projecting these structural issues that are um, causative factors into these individual friendships or relationships, marriages as well.
Yeah.
And it has sort of caused this sort of precipitous decline in the quality and the depth of many people's experience of friendship. And so I guess I'm just naming it like there is a sort of reclamation work, like in so many areas of our lives, of what is it to really engage meaningfully, like to really have a sense of wellspring that we can bring to our friendships to say, I'm here with you.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, like in so many areas of life, has to also, be measured out in boundaries.
Right. Be measured out in boundaries and be measured out in short-term loss for long-term gain. I mean, I think of Michael Chabon's book that I read decades ago called, what was it called? Fatherhood, Manhood. I didn't check before, but it's one of those. And, he says the glue that ties you to your child, like the amount of glue that you have is in perfect parallel, runs in perfect parallel to the number of uncomfortable, horrible, ghastly moments you've spent with them, like wiping up their drool when they're little, but then through all the stages, the equivalent of that. It's directly proportional to how much of ourselves are we willing to give away, hence the loss, right? The short-term loss. How much are we willing to give away in order to glue, in order to cement ourselves through time, through, the stages, through, so that we can say like, I was there, I was there, I was there, I was there. And then it's easier for the other person to believe that we'll always be there, right? Because, if past is prologue, we can really lean on that more than we can lean on any temporal delight that we share with a person, or any overlapping circumstances like we were talking about earlier. There's something about that commitment to perpetuity that, like you said, in this time of like loneliness, and the world is fucked. We haven't like said that, but it's rough. And I know every generation thinks that their world is like the most fucked up world. And yet, can I say, like, it seems like we are in a particular, we're in a rough patch world-wise. And so we feel the ubiquitous nervousness of that also in the air, and that disquiets us as well. And so it's like, what can we do to not prove to each other, but to illustrate for one another our intentions, our deep intentions toward each other? And I think what we can do is create practices back to that, that we can sort of slog through sometimes, like a weekly call. It's like, yeah, it's fun, but also not. Like, it doesn't sometimes get to what's genuine or radiant about a connection to have a weekly call. Like if you have a weekly call, maybe 1 in 15 weekly calls is going to really feel like, ooh, that felt really generative, or that felt really, inspiring. But you got to do that Chabon thing of like slogging through those other 14. You can't just wait until inspiration strikes you and call on that 15th week, because if you didn't show up to those other 14, something is lost. Something more than just a half hour is lost. Something is aggregating not on the plus side, but on the minus side of connection.
Mm. There's a quote from my brilliant friend that I think is an encapsulation for me of this this friendship of ours, and also just, you know, a definition of friendship that can endure. And it is a practice. It's just like every mindfulness practice, it's a practice of coming back.
Yeah.
You know, of returning, of saying, like, I still have the want to be here.
Mm-hmm.
So she says, Leela shook her head skeptically. She was trying to understand. We were both trying to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding was something that we loved to do together.
Oh, I love that. Good quote you picked there. Aw. Exactly. Because so much is inexplicable, and it will go on forever being inexplicable. And, you know, friendship doesn't solve the inexplicable nature of being alive. It doesn't even, you know, most of the time act as a salve, you know, for all of the ways in which we feel wounded by that. But it's a subtle comfort that means everything when we have it, and a gaping maw when we don't.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I love you.
I love you too. Privileged to be among the few.
Hey friends, thank you so much for listening today. If you find value in these conversations, here's how you can support. Become a subscriber at seanperel.substack.com, and please rate, review, and share your favorite episode with a friend. I leave you with an original song written by Serena Joy Bixby for all of us still learning what it means to be human. Is it love? Is it hate? Grief or heartache, or what does it mean to be human? Is it tears? Is it laughter? Is it not knowing what comes after? What does it mean to be human? Well, I'm sure I don't know. This life, where it goes, the days come, the days go, and I'm still human. Oh, one thing I know for sure is I'm looking for more. Gonna go out, learn what it means to be human. I find the joy in the mess. Oh, I'm just doing my best. Oh, learning what it means being human. Oh, learning.
recording.